Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is proudly brought to us by WB40, Women Beyond 40, a platform for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond who want to share and learn about hard-won wisdom. You can join us over at WB40.com. Before we begin today's podcast, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded. And in my case, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. And I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and pay homage to their ancient culture of storytelling. Today in the podcast, I am blown away by our special guest. She's so incredible. I feel like there is nothing that she can't do if she puts her mind to it. My incredible guest is Shantelle Thompson. If you haven't heard of her, you really should. Shantelle is a proud Barkindji, Ngiyampaa First Nations Woman. She is a 3-time world champion in Jiu-Jitsu. She is the mother of 6 and she is running a business. So she's a businesswoman as well. And her business is all about helping women to thrive, or girls to thrive, which is so amazing. Everything about her is passionate and incredible, and I was a fan before I met her, but having met her now, I'm definitely a bigger fan. Please welcome to the confessional the extremely wonderful Shantelle Thompson. Hello, Shantelle. Welcome to the Good Girl Confessional. How are you today?
Hi, Sandy. I'm really good and really excited to be here.
Me too, because I've got to say, no one else will know this, but I'm going to let everyone know. We've probably talked for a good 40 minutes or something before we've even hit record. Amazing conversation. And I finally had to say, wait, I better hit record because there's all this gold. You're amazing. I was sitting here so enthralled by all of your wisdom that I was like, oh, I forgot to hit record. So I know we're in for a good podcast today. I'm so thrilled to finally meet you. I think I'm just so blown away, and I said this to you earlier. I don't know how you achieve all the things that you achieve, because it's a lot. And when we think about it, and we'll go into all of these different aspects of your life, a 3-time world champion, which is extraordinary, an Order of Australia, NAIDOC Sportswoman of the Year in 2019, Sportsperson of the Year. You're a business owner and you're a mum of 6. And I'm so grateful for your time right now, by the way, because I also know this is the last day of your family holiday, so I feel a bit guilty. So thanks for joining me today. But that's you, and I love this. So you do so much, but you don't like to use the word balance. So let's start there.
So I'd like to begin by acknowledging and paying my respects to the country that I'm on, which is Barkindji country on the central coast of New South Wales, and pay my respects to this community's elders, both past and present, and acknowledge them for their continuing custodianship of country, of culture and community, because I feel welcomed in this beautiful space. And Australia has, the landscape that we now call Australia has so much beauty and depth to it, and it's because of the determination and the strength, the courage, the warrior heart, the resilience of our ancestors and our elders that we are still here, that someone like me who is so fair-skinned can be so strongly connected to her First Nations heritages and use that strength and where it's available to me, go back and try and pull together the pieces and the threads that are available to me to learn my culture and my heritage and pass that on. It's because of those who have come before us. And we're a matriarchal culture as well. So I have that blueprint for how to be a powerful female in a current world that was set up to make sure that we didn't feel powerful or that we're fighting against all these status quos. That's my norm. My being matriarchal and powerful is the normal blueprint that's available to me. And I also acknowledge my elders, both past and present, from Barkindji and Ngiyampaa country, and just thank those who have come before me that allow me to be me. And I also acknowledge our emerging elders, because they are the reason I do what I do. They're the reason I have the courage to show up and continue to try and figure things out, because I want to ensure that I play my role and do my part to further the path for them to follow, so that when it's their turn to step up, they've already got the tools and the resources they need to start their journey off strong, to go into and to lay those foundations for generations to come. And I think for me, it's, I trust now, particularly in being in business and being in more corporate or professional roles in spaces that I didn't grow up in, I haven't been conditioned to these spaces, is when something doesn't land with me and I get a physical, visceral response to it, a physiological response to it, even if I can't articulate at the time why it doesn't work for me, I've learned now to trust and just go, hey, that doesn't work for me, or it doesn't land. It's like in business, you have to have your niche market or your client avatar. I'm like, that doesn't work for me, because I don't know anyone that could put together a client avatar that would be exactly like me. However, the energy that I bring, the determination, the heart sort of stuff, that's there. So for me, I picked up weaving in 2020, and I didn't grow up learning my culture. I grew up on country, I grew up in community, and I grew up always being Aboriginal, but I didn't grow up learning a lot of my culture. I got exposure and experiences to bits and pieces. So I'm now trying to learn as much as I can that's available to me of the parts that land for me, so I can then pass that on to my children, so that they're not having to play catch up later on. Weaving was something that I picked up in 2020 and was taught to me by Tegan Murdoch, who is known as Ngiyampaa Weaving, and she's a Barkindji woman. She's a cousin of mine. And we were talking about the principles of weaving. And in order to create a weaving piece, you need to start with a coil, or the core of the weaving. And you're intentional about which strands of raffia or whatever you use for your weaving to pick up and to bind together, and then you pick another strand that you're going to use to weave and create the coil and to start your pieces. And for me, it was like, well, I've always been weaving my whole life. I've never been one thing. I'm the third eldest of 18 siblings. I'm an Aboriginal woman, a First Nations woman with fair skin. I was raised by my father, who's non-Indigenous, whilst being raised in my community because my father supported that. So there's always so many things that I've always been, and I grew up being told I was either too much or not enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, not sporty enough, or I wanted too much. I was too loud, too ambitious. So from a really young age, I had to go, fuck it, I'm going to walk my own path. And for whatever reason, I have been gifted this ability to listen to my own heart and to be able to see beyond the current moment, that there was more for me, or to have a bigger vision for myself that would lead me and give me the courage to guide me out of whatever current situation I was in, whether it was when I was 15 and told by two different teachers at the same in the same time frame. One teacher told me I was more likely to end up dead or pregnant than I was to finish school because statistics were against me, and that my brothers were more likely to end up as perpetrators of family violence. Now, I know that that was because she was intimidated by whatever the power or the passion, the energy that I had. For this grown woman to feel, who was in a position of leadership and supposed to be nurturing my potential, to feel comfortable or propelled to say something like that. And then I had another teacher a few months later say to me that I had so much potential, but I had my head stuck so far up my own ass that I was the cause of a lot of my own problems. Now, this teacher had been trying to help me for months, but I wasn't open to that. And I don't think she realised, though, the seeds that she had planted inside of me that would take root when I needed them. And that happened when those words took root inside of me when I found out I was pregnant with my first daughter. So for me, weaving makes so much more sense because I weave together the role of being a mother, of being a First Nations woman and wanting to have a voice in the world that empowers my community to remember who we are beyond the trauma, beyond colonization, to remember the 80,000 years, the unbroken connection that we have to this country, to our culture and to the landscape. And also to challenge the narratives that are held about my culture and about my community by others that are often more of a deficit rather than a strength base, to go, First Nations cultures around the world have solutions to current first world problems. We don't need new solutions. We just need to have the courage to look to ancient solutions and be innovative with how we bring those solutions to the current problems, without cultural appropriation and with acknowledging and doing the right thing to bring those solutions into our current situation. So for me, weaving, and I call myself a dream walker, life weaver, and it's because I've always been led by my dreams. It's been my dreams that have allowed me to take the steps that I've needed, and weaving things together. But the heart, the coil of everything for me is the warrior heart, which is to stand in your power, be your truth, and follow your heart. And it's my children who have always, even before they came into my womb, that have always called to me to be the better version of myself and have the courage to follow my ancestral calling, because the more I become, the more they become.
Yeah, wow. And that's really, it's so powerful you talking about, and I'm a huge believer in this, that as children, especially young adolescents, that the people around us, the supposed role models, can make or break a human being, right? And I was very lucky to have a couple of amazing teachers where, as you say, they planted seeds. And I'm sure I was at times really bloody challenging, I must say. I was always questioning everything, talking back. But I do think they planted seeds as well, that you could do this, you have the capability to be something, and but you're stopping yourself. And that really resonated with me when you said that, because I was told that as well. I'm really sorry though for the negative teachers that bought into stereotyping and bullshit, but boy did you prove them wrong. And I hope particularly that those teachers are looking where you are now and thinking, well, I got that so wrong. I think you're so extraordinary. And I think, as you say, like, you are learning all the time still about your culture and embracing it and taking that on board. And we were talking about a lot about that earlier, about not following our intuition. And for you, like, you've got 2 podcasts, both are pretty amazing. One, I honestly, and I listened to both, and I was just telling you, I was listening to one of them yesterday while I was walking, and you have all these beautiful little pearls of wisdom that really resonated with me. But one of your podcasts is Warrior Heart Yarns with Aunty Sham, which I just love. And the other one, of course, is your journey to Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Now, what's fascinating to me is you've got this journey to the black belt, but in actual fact, you've got 3 world championships under your belt already, which is phenomenal. So tell me about, God, there's so much to talk about here. Tell me about what led you, because you said, someone said to you, you weren't sporty enough and you weren't whatever. And then you end up a 3 times world champion and you're still training now, which is incredible. How did you get into that? Like, what led you down that path, and how did you find, say, Jiu-Jitsu? What was it about that particular sport that really resonated with you?
So I grew up fighting. I've been fighting from day one, and it's, for me, I look back and I take who I am being very seriously in this current chapter, because my mum, through choices but also through society, could not be herself. She grew up, and I think that she was told at a young age to tell people she was Indian rather than Aboriginal, because of, my mum was born before she was even a citizen of this country. She was born before the 67 referendum and things like that. And looking back at my mum's story, my grandmother's story on my Aboriginal side, so my mum is Barkindji, Ngiyampaa, and my father is white Australian with Irish, Scottish heritage, and Chinese, actually. And looking back at both my parents' stories, so I got interested in trauma probably around 2015 when I was working in a field, and I wanted to understand trauma and how it had driven the behaviors. But the more I started to understand about my parents' story and the fact that they were products of their circumstances, it allowed forgiveness to play a big role. I grew up a really, I would swing first and ask questions later. And I was really good with my fists, both because I had to be, but that was also my way of communicating with the world. It was my way of asserting myself and feeling powerful. I was sexually abused at the age of 6 by a family member, and I remember that this was the first time that I'd raised my voice. After the incident happened, my mum was in hospital giving birth. Her two sisters were there, and we were left alone with my auntie's husband, who was the abuser. And I remember being pulled from the car where we'd hid ourselves to be safe, and I spoke up and said, he touched us, and I got shut down immediately. Now, I was 6 years old, and it was from that I knew, for whatever reason, a seed was planted in me that it was going to be on me, that whatever was going to happen would be on me. There was no one there to rescue me. There was no one there that was going to protect me. Now, that wasn't always true, but in certain key moments, it was the truth. So I grew up fighting. I remember at 11, I was in the street and I got into a fight with one of the Aboriginal boys because he said I wasn't black. And I was like, you don't get to tell me who I am or who I'm not. So and being the third eldest of 18 siblings as well, majority of them boys, you kind of grow up. I physically was dominating my younger siblings for a really long time till they got bigger than me. So, and because I was so easily triggered and so easily put into that fight mode, like people say freeze, fight or flight, I was easily triggered because I was always sitting at a heightened state. I was always in this triggered state. So it was very hard for me to self-regulate and respond rather than react, because that was what my nervous system knew. So when I was 18 and I started going out night clubbing and things like that, I was getting into a lot of fights because I would see guys hitting on women that didn't want to be hit on. And I started working as a nightclub. I was a bouncer at a nightclub as well. And I would take pride in the fact that I could go up and end a situation at any point. But I was doing it. What happened was I actually started to enjoy the violence. It started to be something that I was like, actually, I feel powerful here. I started to not necessarily look for trouble, but I had that energy where I manifested and attracted that situation. And I had an older woman in my life at the time who said, look, you're going to get yourself into some really serious trouble. You're either going to hurt someone or you're going to hurt yourself. So she suggested that I go and check out this local martial arts gym. And I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, what? Because the thing is, like I said, I didn't even know who Kathy Freeman was for a long time. I didn't grow up with these aspirational role models. Sometimes we couldn't even afford to send the kids to the pool when it was like 20 cents. So sport was never a part of my thing. I played basketball for a few years, and the only reason I was allowed to play basketball is because I was tall. And my cousins were like, discouraged me from shooting the ball. That's how uncoordinated I was. My cousin even had to teach me to dance. I'm not one who had this natural rhythm or anything. So to see where I am now is really quite amusing at times, but it also aligns with when you trust in the path that you're being guided to, that things can just happen and fall into place. And I walked into the gym and there was this guy that I had a crush on that was there at the time. So I was like, oh, okay. And they were doing jiu-jitsu, which they were rolling around on the ground. And I was like, this looks like what I do with my brothers at home. What the hell is this? So that was my first entry point of walking into the gym and going, okay, this is Kyokushin karate, this is jiu-jitsu. But I think what really landed with me at that time was this idea of martial arts and respect and heritage and legacy, even though I didn't know it at the time. And then I did it for a few years. But what really brought me back to jiu-jitsu was, because that was my entry point and I trained for quite a few years. And I don't really often talk about that early start. So that was at 19. So it's been 20 years since I first walked into a gym. After the birth of my twins in 2009, I had my first daughter in 2006. So we did jiu-jitsu and MMA and karate and kickboxing for quite a few years, and I had aspirations to be a UFC fighter. So when I was 20, I'd actually broken up with my partner, and we were like, okay, we're not working out, this is done. So I made plans to move to Melbourne. I was going to be a stripper to fund my university studies, and I was being a teacher at the time, so I don't know how that would have, I don't know where my thinking was at. And I was going to use stripping to fund my college, my university degree, and I was going to be a UFC fighter. Then I found out I was pregnant with my daughter, and it was like, okay, that's not happening. Fast forward to 2011, I had my twins in 2009. In 2010, I was diagnosed with severe postnatal depression after an incident where I actually hurt my daughter and tried to suicide. And if anyone wants to know more about that part of my story, they can Google my name. There's a few things out there. And long story short, I went to a doctor, and she said to me that I was a risk to my children. She wanted to call Child Protection to do a welfare check because she'd noticed on my file I was of Indigenous heritage. I was 26 years old, and the reason I hadn't gone for help was because of the risk of losing my children because of the childhood removal rates. And I left in a panic. I made some threats, and I was driving to my sister's, and I'm like, if I'm really this much of a risk to my children, maybe I'm better off not being here, because I'd actually hurt my daughter that morning because I'd just been in such a triggered state. And my husband walked through the door at the time that I was having the vision. So I say now, I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't have walked through the door, but I'm very grateful that I didn't have to find out, because I know that I was capable of taking their life and mine. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that, but that's my truth. That was how sick I was. And it was also how unsafe it was in the world for a person who is used to being the leader of the family to speak up and say, I'm actually not strong right now. I need help. But I can't trust the people around me to be able to hold space for me while I'm not being strong, because I was used to being there for everyone else. So it was after this incident that I came home, and I still remember to this day the look of relief on my family's face when I said, I'm sick and I need help. And I understood now that they knew that something wasn't right, but no one knew how to help me until I was ready to help myself. And it was actually George, my partner, who said, hey, if you don't want to take medication, because my family has a history of addiction and whatnot. And this comes back to my family as well. Like I said, I get to be the woman that my mother couldn't be because of her heritage and her own addictions and her own trauma. She didn't have access to the resources that I did, but for whatever reason, she couldn't access that strength within herself. And my dad, from a really young age, had depressive states. His father was a prisoner of war and had PTSD and all these sort of things. So for whatever reason, I've been given the strength and the anchors to be able to be my own person in a world that I'm not supposed to exist as I am. As an Aboriginal woman, as a world champion, like whatever you want to put it as, I am not supposed to be thriving and flourishing in this world with all the different parts that I am. At least that was the story that I was told. And it was George who said, hey, like, why don't we try jiu-jitsu again? Like, we'll go back to the gym. And at first I was really resistant, but I knew that I needed to do something to help myself, because a promise that I'd made to myself before I even became a mum was that I didn't want my children to become victims of my trauma, or didn't want to become victims of my circumstances. So I started back at training, and it was like I was in this black hole. I couldn't see color. I was just really flat and everything. After about 6 to 8 months of forcing myself to go, like having to fight with myself to go, I slowly started to see color again. I slowly started to have space. So I'd go into the gym not wanting to be there. But by the time I'd left and gone through that physical process, and for me, that's actually what creates change. It's not all these other therapies and things. For me, it's when I move my body and move that energy through that it creates space for me to clear whatever thinking is happening, or to meet the moment for what it is. And 6 months into training, I was getting better, and the coach was like, hey, we're going to the state championships. Who wants to come? I was like, well, I know I can fight, but can I fight in a controlled environment and channel that stuff and make it something constructive, like embrace that fighting part of myself? Because I know that I'm capable of really dark things. If you were to harm my children, you're going to hospital. If you've done things to my children that have been done to me, I've already got your coffin ready to go. And people aren't comfortable with that, but I've made peace with that side of myself, because I became a product of my circumstances, and I've had to make friends with and embrace that part of Shantelle, because she protected me. She allowed me to stay alive for such a long part of my life, that it's about embracing her and going, we can use you in a different way in this season because you're not needed in that way. And Jiu-Jitsu gave me a vehicle back to myself. And it was at that point that I also started reconnecting back to my culture as well. So the two journeys kind of wove together to really anchor me to find healing, to find a greater purpose again, and to find a vehicle to become who I needed to become, to be the mother that my children needed, but to bring myself into the world in a way that was purposeful and could be of service, so that I could get out of the situation that I was in.
Yeah, wow. And so you head off to state championships with, and obviously thinking, I don't know whether I'm, I don't know, did you have a plan at that point? Did you have a plan? Did you think, I'm actually could be a good shot here? Or tell me about the journey, because I want to know what it felt like when you went to the World Championships, and not just went, but you bloody won it. And then went back twice and won it again. So I just want to know that thought process, because I really love that. At the same time this is happening, which is giving you a purpose, but also, and I'm a child who was abused. I was an abused child as well. This interesting thing about trauma and how everybody deals with their trauma very differently. But in you finding a vehicle to heal, and to be able, at the same time, as you said, this weaving of, really starting to embrace your culture and who you are, that's powerful. So you're doing two very powerful things woven together at once, really.
I think they both supported each other, though, because the biggest purpose for me was to go, my children didn't ask to be born into this. I have a responsibility to do something about this. So that was kind of the core anchor that allowed me to show up, because like we spoke about, motivation is a flirty friend. She comes and goes, and she likes to have one night stands. She doesn't like long-term commitments. She has a commitment phobia. It's purpose and meaning that allow me to show up with discipline and intention. Now, discipline and I are also flirty friends. She doesn't like discipline likes me, but I don't really like her. So we're fixing that relationship. I think the biggest thing when I went to that competition was I was more curious. I was like, well, and I had all the ego part of it. It was like, well, shit, my community knows I can fight, but can I fight over here in a different way? And I think the biggest thing for me was like, well, mate, the other girl's going to be trying to tear my head off as much as I'm going to be tearing her head off as well. So that was the vehicle at the time. That was the mindset of going, I'm strong, I'm powerful. Can I do that in this arena? And it wasn't easy, because when we started jiu-jitsu, it changed our whole lifestyle. Like we not that I've ever been a big partier or a drinker or whatever, but I was never and I was always kind of relatively healthy, but it wasn't an intentional, structured lifestyle. So jiu-jitsu changed the way we ate. It changed the way we lived. And because we were young parents as well. I was 27 when this was happening. We already had 3 kids. I really had to be intentional to say to my family and go, you're babysitting tonight. I had so many siblings that I was like, we had a rotating roster. And sometimes people were like, shouldn't you be home more? You're away from your kids a lot. And my oldest daughter likes to say, she grew up on the mats. She was born on the mats. So I had to be really intentional. When you're going first at anything, it can be a really lonely road to walk, because people they can't always see the destination. They can't see what you can see. And for me, walking this journey to my first world title, let alone 3, was really challenging, and now I understand that the people who were saying, oh, you're going to die when you get on a plane to go to America, or you're going to get shot, or why are you eating like that, or why are you doing it like that? For a lot of them, it was because that was the limitations of what they knew to be possible. We have been taught that it is not safe to dream in our community. It's better, with child removal, the missions, the policies, the learned helplessness, so many things. There's so many things, conditioning that we have to undo. And a lot of the trauma wasn't always my own. It was and it wasn't jealousy or this crab in a bucket thing. It was actually other people's fears. They just wanted me to be safe because I was doing things they didn't even know was possible. And they were projecting that onto me. So that first comp, my mindset was, fuck it, let's just go and see what happens. And I fell in love with the adrenaline. Like, don't get me wrong, this is a big ego boost. Like, I love winning, and I was like, oh, yeah, I like this rush of strength. But also there was something more anchored, more mature, something that I couldn't understand that was happening at the time. It was like, I have to face myself here. When I get on the mats, I train with other people, but it's just me. Yeah, I can have a coach in my corner, but I have to face myself before I even face my opponent, to go, I want to earn my own self-respect. But a lot of my achievements have been trauma-driven as well. Like my self-harm and a trauma behavior of mine is high achievement. To go, if I have 3 degrees, if I have all these things, fuck you, you can't say anything to me, and I deserve to be in the room. It was more my way of going, somehow I understood from, not intentionally, but there was this unconscious guidance to go, if I have status, if I have certificates and things, then I get the right to have a voice and I can create change. I will earn respect. Doors will open. And it's always been this thing to go, I want to remind my community of who we are beyond the trauma. I want to be the change I want to see in the world, but I also want to challenge the narrative of other people's opinions that does a lot of harm to my community. And so for me, that was the path. And so we trained for my first competition was 2011, and I won a state title, and I was like, fuck, I'm actually good at this. I could do this, and I enjoy it. So we trained for another 18 months, and then in 2012, we competed 10 times that year. Like, we traveled to the Northern Territory to do the state titles. Now, none of this was funded. We were working, raising our family and funding this as well. And I was getting all this pushback from my community and my family and whatnot. And then I said to George, and then this idea whispered itself to me. It wasn't loud. It was like, what if there could be more? Like, what's the next step of this? Like, you've just won an Australian title. Like, what's next? And this idea of being a world champion whispered its way into me, and I laughed. I was like, hell no! Like, you've never traveled overseas. I traveled overseas once when I was in high school, but there was no one who'd role modeled any of this to me. Like, it was like, you can't do that. Like, you're 27, you're a mum of 3. Like, young people do that, but it wouldn't go away. And it just sat there, and it became more painful to ignore it. Like, I was getting sick because I was ignoring where I was being told to go. It wasn't just that I wanted this. I was being called to do this. And I think there's a difference, is that my ancestors, I was being shown where to go. And that's now what I know, is that I don't need to know the how or even the what. It's the why. And for me, it was like, okay, I need to do this because I'm meant to go off and do something. You can't take people places you haven't been yourself. So I said to my partner, I said it to my partner, and I said it to my sister at the time, just to kind of judge how they would react. And I said, hey, why don't we move to Melbourne and try and take this to the next level? Because at the competition that year, I'd said to the guy who was the head coach for our small regional gym, I said, I reckon I want to try and become a world champion. And his name is Tiago Stefanuti, and he said to me, he goes, I believe it's possible for you if you're willing to do the work. And it was having someone else believe in me before I really believed in myself that gave me the courage to go, okay. So that's why we moved to Melbourne, was to train with this guy and to pursue this. And that was how it kind of started. And it was, for me, I didn't even believe it was possible. I was like, and when we first moved to Melbourne, and this is the thing, right? Synchronicity happens. When you're following your path, the things that you need or the resources you need will be put in your path. So when we moved to Melbourne, the idea was like, okay, well, we'll find a job. I was finishing my teaching degree. So I took 10 years to finish my teaching and arts degree. And it was my final year of our studies. And I was like, okay, if we move to Melbourne, I can finish my degree. We'll get a teaching job and we'll just figure it out. And my husband, as George said to me, he goes, if we don't like it and we try for a year, we can always come home. I was like, okay, sweet. So we went to Melbourne. I was like, okay, it might take us a year to save up. What does it take to go to the World Championships? We never even sat down and mapped it out. We weren't like, okay, this is the 3-year plan. This is how much it's going to cost. We were just winging it at every step. And here's the thing, to take my children away from country, away from their family, especially as the oldest, and they were the first grandchildren, to take them away from their Tongan grandparents and my parents, it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, to deal with the guilt of taking my kids away. Because there's one thing to be Tongan or to be Aboriginal or to be something, but to grow up with that, to grow up in your community with the nuances of facial expressions and things that you can't read from a textbook. It's just exposure and conditioning was really hard. But that year, I think we'd been in Melbourne 3 months, and we entered a competition where it was if you won the competition, you would get a free ticket and a training camp to compete at one of the world championships in America. And I competed and I won. And I was like, shit, I'm going to America and I'm going to be competing at the Worlds. And at the same competition, my partner, my husband, George, ended up competing against one of our teammates. And the teammate actually won, but he turned around and he goes, I don't need this. And he gifted his ticket to George. So we both, in March of 2013, we just moved to Melbourne and we'd made peace with going, oh yeah, we'll go to the Worlds next year. To go, in November, we're going for 3 weeks to America to compete and train at an elite gym, and then we're going to compete at the World Championships. I was like, I got bashed. I mean, I got bashed that year. When I went to Worlds, and the women that I was training with at an elite level in America were like, how long have you been training? Like, you bruise, like they were very like, are you sure you're even qualified to be here and to be at this level? And then to go and get bashed, it was like, maybe I need to rethink this. But then I was like, nah, the fact that I got to travel and compete laid the seeds for what was to happen. And I didn't compete again internationally until 2015, but that was kind of the journey of me going, this could really happen. I don't believe it's possible, but I get to travel and I'm doing what I love. And then I started to understand, because when we left Mildura to move to Melbourne, 2 nights a week, we would have between 5 and 15 people in our garage doing health and wellbeing. I started to understand that what we were doing was changing lives, because we were being role models who made people go, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's what I started to understand, is that by who I was being a role model for other people to believe it was possible for themselves. So I was like, well, what if I go and do this? Even if I didn't become a world champion, just by trying to do it and walking that journey, I could bring other people with me, but I can't bring other people with me places I haven't been.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. And I agree. And one of the big things I always say, look, and, obviously my platform's very different, but it's starting a platform for women to be recognized for their wisdom beyond the age of 40, 50, 60, and to bring younger sisters with us on this journey, which is so important. One of the things I always say is we can't be what we cannot see, right? And so it's similar to your phrasing, but it is 100% true. I believe that with every fiber of my being. And what you were doing with your community, and I love that you were so oblivious to it initially, was that they're watching you. They're watching you in the way that you eat, in the way that you train, in the way that you're weaving your family, right? And that how amazing. And as you say, even if you hadn't have won the World Championships, you're saying to your community, look what I've achieved. I've traveled. I've done it. I put myself on the line and I tried. And that's massive. But anyway, that's mute because you did win 3 times. But I love that there's a big journey to that. And thank you for sharing that bit too, that when you first went, you got hammered.
Oh,
and that
I got bashed. And I think the biggest thing is like, even coming back to the podcast, the reason there are 2 podcasts is because they play different roles. So, and the journey to black belt was more for that podcast is more for myself to track my journey, because I'm an intuitive downloader. Like, my magic comes out in conversation and in sharing my story. And for me, I don't want to be, and not taking anything away from legends who are called to share the journey they've had, I don't want to be up on a stage sharing the things I did 20 years ago. I want to be saying that was the foundation, but that's how it's led to what I'm doing today. And so the journey to black belt is in life, in jiu-jitsu, and in business. Because for me, the journey to become a black belt is very different. Like, you've got to have a skill set, you've got to have mentors and guides on that. So for me, it's very obvious. In jiu-jitsu, the journey is to get my black belt. In business, it's to hit my first $1 million, like my first 7 figures. That's black belt level in business for me. And then in life, it's to go, right, I know who I am. My family's financially taken care of. If something was to happen to me, my family's solid, and I'm living a life of self-determination on my path, and I get to do what I want whilst taking care of my family and having impact in the world. That's black belt level. Black belt world champion, which is the chapter after that, is what does it take to become a black belt world champion? So there's two kind of layers that I'm building on here. So for me, it's sharing what is that journey? What does it look like to be a black belt in business? And why 7 figures? Because I've had to prostitute myself in business or in my vision to get other people to invest in it to do the things that I do. So I run a not-for-profit called Kiilalaana Foundation, which is a social enterprise working with young First Nations women in regional Victoria. And our whole thing is about, before these girls are told to become leaders for other people, we're creating a space for them to learn how to lead themselves, to understand themselves. Because as a woman who is a part of a collective, I've been told it's my responsibility to serve everyone else. But my being of service to others is often in self-abandonment. It means, how can I serve others without abandoning myself is the question that I'm now on. And how can I belong to myself before I belong to others? And I believe that this is the foundations that allows me to have boundaries, that allows me to, in a situation, to be able to say, no, hey, that's not okay. Now, that's not without its trauma triggers, and it's a practice. It's not something that I've perfected and I can go, yeah, every situation I can speak my truth and tell people to fuck off or whatever it is. It's a practice, and it's about me role modeling that. So that's what that whole thing is that if I get to 7 figures, I know I can invest that back into my community. I can buy back my cultural land that doesn't, and buy a piece of my country back, so it gets handed back down through my family. I can fund the work that I want to do in the world, not necessarily do it and burn out in the process. So for me, learning about money and finance and investing and things like that will allow me to have the finances to fund the self-determination and fund the impact I want to do in the world on my terms and according to the girls that I work with. Warrior Heart Yarns with Aunty Shan is all about, we have elders and aunties in our community. Now, I find that there's always 2 types, usually. You'll have the one that'll be, you'll go and tell them your problems or how you've made a mistake, and they'll be like, okay, let's sit down and let's talk about this. And then you got the auntie that'll grab you by the back of the hair and give you a good hard crack because you've been doing the wrong thing and go, oi, shut up, sit down and listen. And give you that tough love. You need to hear that accountability, that responsibility, because you've been the one making a mistake or not showing up in the right way, but doing it in service of your best self, and so that you show up to be of service and honor the privileges of those who are watching you, those who are you're responsible for and have an obligation. But I want to do that service to others while serving myself as well, and going the more sustainable and serve from my wellness and my overflow. So Warrior Heart Yarns with Aunty Shan is all about those life lessons, these pockets of wisdom, those yarns that you sometimes need to have and need to hear. And sometimes it's just more for myself to share what wisdom I need to hear so that I can come back and go, I was talking about that 6 months ago, but I'm not really living that. So it's that accountability as well. And this idea of going places and building a vehicle on a platform for other people to look and go, well, if Aunty Shan can do it, then I can do it too. And it's about that being and that courage to do and follow your own light, and trusting that by you doing that, you become a light for others. Not necessarily, you can't force people to go places they don't want to go. It's more about going people who connect with that. So that's why that journey. And yeah, I've won world titles, and I've got 3 degrees under my belt. I've got businesses. I am a business, which all this shit just makes me go, who is this woman? Who is this person? But when people read out I have a higher capacity to do a lot of stuff. But just because I can doesn't mean I should, which is where I'm at right now. And being 39 and understanding that it's time to do things differently, because how I'm showing up is not necessarily role modeling how I want my girls to show up, or thinking that how they want to be in the world and what they want to do in the world can be driven from their wellness, their thriving, not from their self-depletion. And though anything I've done, I say to people, I haven't done it to impress you, but rather to express to you the potential of what is possible, because that was my path. These are the things that have lit me up. These are the things that I thought were right for me to do, or to do those things in order to become the person to deliver the things, the change that I want to do in the world. And There's video footage of me being dumped on my head in Africa because I thought it was a good idea after some old white guy told me I should go home and be a mum to my kids that's why I ended up trying out for the Olympics. And I got dumped on my head by a woman who had been wrestling for 20 years. Like, have some perspective, Shan. And then in 2019, my final year of competition before COVID, I went to Tokyo and competed. I came up against this young 17-year-old who I didn't know was 17 at the time. I'd never heard of this woman's name. It's quite a small community, so you tend to get to know who's in the playing field. She had her whole team there. Her name was being screamed out. I was by myself. I was just there with me, my ancestors, and my training. And in the first 10 seconds, she literally makes me faceplant. I say to the kids when I talk to kids that I left half my face in Tokyo. This girl beat me. First round in 3 different countries in 3 different competitions. First round at 17. And that's my truth, is that I have more highlight reels of me getting dumped on my head than I have winning. But it's the courage to get back up and not quit on myself that has allowed me to have the moments where I've become a world champion and have laid the foundations for where I'm at now.
Yeah, wow. I'm always like really blown away by women like yourself who have that message, because it's so important. It's not about the winning, although that's amazing, but it's when you fall. What makes a champion is that you keep standing up. You keep standing up and you face yourself, and then you still get on that mat, right? I had lovely chick on here, Sam Bloom. Her life story has been made into a film called Penguin Bloom, was played by Naomi Watts. But Sam was on here, and she sadly had a really bad accident in Thailand and can no longer walk. But through that, she always had a love of surfing and the beach and the ocean and the land. And that was her thing. Water and land was her thing. And she is now like a parasurfing champion, world champion. You know what I mean? It's like amazing. And she said, the interesting, when you say how everything leads us where we're meant to be, she said, would she have done that if it weren't for these other circumstances? But she said it was bloody hard. And it's the ability to just keep showing up. Right? You just got to keep showing up and doing it.
People want to hear like about the resilience and all this sort of stuff. It's freaking hard. There are days I don't want to get out of bed. Yeah. And yeah, like to hear stories like that, it gives others permission to go, if this person can do it, then so can I. But it's about also that accountability to look yourself in the eye and to go, am I not doing this thing because I don't want to, or just because I'm too lazy? Like, sometimes we need that personal accountability to sit with ourselves and our own bullshit and the things that we're telling ourselves to go, either, yeah, you just don't want it. Like people who go, oh, I want to get healthy. It's like, no, you freaking don't. You're quite happy doing what you're doing, but you're saying that because, and it's this balance of self-acceptance and going, this is who I am, and being unapologetic about that, but also taking responsibility for the consequences and the benefits that has to your experience in the world, and how you're showing up and the things you're doing. And for me, I'm going into things I've never done before. But I also know that I can be successful because I've done things that I never thought was possible, that I was told by society, by the world around me, that those things are not available to me. And for me, I've had to be the person who's gone first. I didn't know it was possible for me to be a business owner, an elite athlete. So for me, I'm doing that so others can look and go, well, if she can do it, I can do it. So, and there are those people who have sometimes had to be the person who goes, no one else has shown me it's possible for me, so I'm going to show myself. But even women, like we've got, it's only been 50 years that women have had the right to vote or own property, and yet we've got women in 50 years that are billionaires that are, and not through inherited wealth, through wealth that they've created themselves. And you go, okay, if this is what women can do in 50 years, and what women, what's her name? Madam C.J. Walker, I'm not sure if you've heard of her story, but she was the first African-American woman to become a millionaire back in the 1800s or whatever it was, millionaire. And it's like, hold on, if she can do that back then with all of the things that were going on, like slavery and all these sort of things, I really have no barriers other than my own mindset, because if it's a human problem, it's figure-outable. That's kind of where I'm sitting at with everything now, is going, I look back and go, I was guided to where I needed to be. And if I can lean into that and trust that more and more, I'm gonna get to where I need to and become who I need to be for whatever purpose that's meant to serve.
I love that. And we were talking about that before we hit record because we've just got so involved. But part of the thing that you said, which I just bloody love and which I agree with, we talked about you get these messages, you say you're guided through your life, your ancestors, but it's a pull. You know that you're meant to be heading down a path. Sometimes you don't know why, but you know that's where you've got to be. And I was saying for me, my mother was quite intuitive, but often ignored it. And her mother, so my grandmother, intuitive, often ignored it, all of those things. And I was saying to you, in my life, whether you want to call it your ancestors, there is an inner voice, a strength that comes from, and I do think it's generational, that tells you when you're on the right path. And every time I've ignored that voice, that intuition, that pull, is where I've landed in trouble and kind of gone, how the hell did I end up here in my life? This is shit, and this is not where I thought I was going to be. Do you think as women, because I strongly do believe this, I think as women, we're so taught to not take up space, to play it small, to be quiet, to stand back, to not own our power. We're so indoctrinated into this bullshit that we find reasons to not take up that purpose and our calling.
Look, I've heard a lot about imposter syndrome, and imposter syndrome in our community navigates itself as shame. Now, I say fuck imposter syndrome. And here's my thinking. This is not based on research or anything. This is just based on my own intuition. And hey, if it works for me and if it works for you, great. I might one day find the time to go and actually research this and build an evidence base for it. But when you look at what imposter syndrome is, and there's women who are now coaches to executive women to overcome their imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a tool of colonization and the patriarchy. And the reason I say that is because why were women in England and during the Renaissance banned from the birthing room, and men suddenly turn around and go, I'm going to interject myself with things I have no experience about, and took birthing away from women? It became illegal for women to do midwifery and things like that, because that's where our power is in our womb. We carry the power to give life. So matriarchally in First Nations culture, we have many different genders. There wasn't just male or female. There were many different genders. But here's the thing. Each gender relied on the other to be successful and powerful. So when you were called for your time to stand up and be a leader in that moment, or what we call momentary leadership, and called because you had the skills to solve the current problem that the collective was facing, it wasn't based off of and even being an elder wasn't always determined by age. It was determined by the gifts and the strength and the wisdom that you carried based off of you, not necessarily your age. And that's not what Western culture, European culture, we were property of men. We were property of systems. So this imposter syndrome is when you're in a room, you feel like you don't belong, or you're going to be found out to be a fraud. Now look around that room that you're in and that fear that you hold. Is it your own, or is it that you've been conditioned because that room is not meant to see you succeed? That room is just working fine. It's nothing wrong with us. The room is doing exactly what it's meant to be doing because it serves the people that it was set up to serve. So that's why I'm like, okay, if we take back our power, that's where I'm at with imposter syndrome, is going, it is a deliberate tool and it works very successfully. So when we choose to go against that and explore where is that actually coming from, we're unconditioning ourselves and coming back to our own intuition. And I believe that I have an inner voice, a higher self that guides me, and my ancestors, because that's what I'm now learning. And like yourself, when I've ignored that calling, I've become sick. And for me, my physical body becomes injured or sick because that's the thing that I listen to the most, because when I'm injured, I can't do jiu-jitsu or I can't do the things I want to do. So the ancestors are like, right, you're not listening, so we're going to force you to listen. Shame, you hear, I love that. In my community, I'll hear a lot of young ones say, nah, I'm not doing that. That's shame. I'm not showing up or whatnot. And I say there's a difference between embarrassment and being shy and being ashamed of who you are and not showing up because you don't want other people laughing at you. That has been conditioned on us because when the colonization process happened, they took men's ability away to provide for their families. They took us off of our country, which our country was a part of who we are. It's our responsibility. It's our identity. So when we couldn't look after what was important to us, women, they took away our language. They took away our children. They made us ashamed to be who we are. They made it unsafe to be who we are, so that it would stop us from taking up space. And when you do that enough over generations, they don't need to do it anymore, because we do it to ourselves. It becomes a learned behavior. We stop it. It becomes a conditioning. So for me, it's like, and I still experience those things, but when I start to experience it, and when I say, fuck that, I'm taking up space and I'm honoring those who came before me, and I'm healing the generations before me who couldn't do what I have the privilege to do today because it's safe for me to do it, or I have the resources to do it. I'm setting the generations who come after me free to write their own story and their own narrative. And my children, as European descent, Tongan, Pacifica descent, and First Nations, there's so many things there to go, where do I focus it? Because it can be really overwhelming in our own house to go, what parts of our culture do we teach our children that are going to serve them for the world they are, and what are the things they need to know? Because we're battling friends, social media, school, the world, the reality. We've got to earn money to make the time to teach culture. So when I reject those things and go, that is not me, that is not my story, and I lean into the small little moments of going, my partner has said something that has hurt my feelings or has made me uncomfortable, or I'm allowing him to stop me from doing something because I'm conditioned because of the trauma of my dad. And I lean in and go, actually, I'm still going to do this thing even if you're not comfortable with it. Or, hey, can we have a conversation? That's really fucking hard. I can say it to a stranger. It's actually easier for me to say it to the world than it is in my own intimate, to my daughter who's upset me because she's gaslighting me, and then her going, oh, that's not real. When I can practice that in my own home, it empowers me to do that externally, because being me, being a First Nations woman with white skin, being almost 40, I'm told by so many different things that I'm not meant to exist in the spaces that I do, or let alone be successful in the spaces that I am. So for me, it's like, it's going slowly, and it's building up that courage and that capacity to do that sustainably over a longer period of time.
God, that's, well, I'm lost for words. That's rare for me, Shantelle, because the reality is I'm listening to this and you go, oh, I'm almost 40. I'm this, I'm, whatever. I can't believe the extraordinary things that you have achieved personally, professionally. You're an elite athlete, an incredible businesswoman, and you can, we were talking offline earlier about how you're continuing to learn those skills to be a businesswoman, to get to that end goal that that you said, what was it that you said to me, that your ancestors are taking you there and you have to get there, so it's going to happen. And you're only 39. And I was saying to you, I couldn't wait to get to 40 when I was in my 30s. I couldn't wait. I used to lie and say I was. I think turning 40 almost gave me permission to go, right, I'm 40 years old. I can say, fuck it now. People are going to take me more seriously. By the way, they don't always take you more seriously because you're 40, but this was in my head that they would. And I think it was because I'd always felt like, I was always someone who just was going to fucking do whatever I wanted to do regardless. And it never made sense to a lot of people, but I had my own journey. That was it. And I kind of, as you said, there's a pull. You know what it is that you need to do. I mean, when I first decided I'm going to do a podcast, I had this, blog that went on for years, which was quite successful. And I went, she's got to grow up. Now it's going to be a podcast, and it's not going to be about my shit anymore. It's going to be, actually, I want to interview amazing women. And I just felt very pulled to do that. And I had a lot of friends and people say, why? Like, what? Why? It's a lot of work and effort, and why? And I wasn't making any money or anything out of it. And I said, I don't know why. I just know that's what I want to do. And it has brought me, and it continues to bring me, so much bloody joy. I think I couldn't have done, like, you end up in the places you're meant to end up at exactly the right time. Timing, the timing will find you. I can't believe
Yes.
you're not even 40 and this is your lead up year to 40. You're turning 40 in November. It's quite extraordinary to me that you've achieved so much and you're so self-aware. That's the other thing that I bloody love. And one thing I constantly say on this podcast, and I say it to every woman of my age who listens, we have to listen to our younger sisters because they're fucking wise. They have wisdom. You know, being however many years, 15 years, whatever it is, younger than me, 14 years, seriously, you're in a different almost generation of women who are embracing themselves, who are standing up to the patriarchy. Women, amazing women of color who I meet from everywhere, different places around the world, who are starting to stand in their power. They are feeling the strength to be able to do things that their mothers couldn't do, their grandmothers couldn't do. And it's not just women of color, it's all women. I do feel like the world is changing and there's a powerful movement for women happening. I do think one of the things that we have to think about, and I'd like to talk to you about this as well, is as white women, we have so much fucking privilege. And I feel like women who have a space, a platform, a voice, need to hold that space for women of colour because it's really important.
We have a responsibility in this. There's a few things here that I'd like to touch on, is that aging is a privilege. In Western culture, aging is seen, particularly for women, it's like, okay, you're getting older, you're getting thicker, you're getting more wrinkled, whatever, it's time to start shifting back out of the limelight a little bit and all this sort of stuff. In our culture, aging is a privilege because you get all these experiences and you have a responsibility to serve those who are coming under you. It's not something that's to be paid. It is a responsibility to sit your ass on the ground, on country, and teach the next generation. And here's the thing. In Western culture and patriarchal systems and the systems, we are trying to learn to find our voice and do things our mothers and grandmothers couldn't do. For me, I'm doing the things my mum and my grandmother couldn't do, and partially my great-grandmother. But beyond that, I'm remembering the things that were already natural to be your strength. So my understanding in this, and I could be getting this wrong, so if anyone is hears this and I have gotten it wrong, please reach out to me to correct me, because I'm going based off of what I know and what I've been gifted to learn so far. My understanding of the Māori culture of child raising is that when a child is born, they will be nurtured to follow their natural curiosities. So the collective, or whoever their caregivers are, will allow the child to follow their natural inclinations. And my understanding is that they will be nurtured in that way because their curiosities will, and where they're naturally pulled to go, will guide them to develop their strengths. And when they are developed in their strengths and the collective holds space for them to become themselves in their strengths and through their experiences, that is when that individual will be able to take their place to be of service to the collective once they've become that version of themselves. And we have different iterations of this throughout our life. It's not like you've bake it once and then you're done forever. And I feel like we've lost that in terms of going, imagine if I was nurtured to become my most powerful self and I serve the world through my gifts and my wellness and my strength. No more, no less. It's not about overcompensating. Just because I have a higher amount of capacity doesn't mean I need to be doing more than the next person. It's about me doing what I'm meant to be doing, best of my capacity, but no more, no less. Because in our culture, I'm a river girl, so we have these birthing trees and they're so big you can't wrap your arms around them. All these grandfather, grandmother trees where the eagle and the crow, Walker and Bilyara, as we know them in Barkindji, they will pick the biggest, strongest tree to build the nest in to nurture their next generation. Now, in order for that tree to become a birthing tree, which holds space for a woman, and the thing is, right, we know in our culture, the woman does not birth the baby. The body and the baby birth themselves. The woman is the conduit for that to happen. So when we learn to surrender to our own knowing and our own magic, we don't need to know anything. We just need to create space for that knowing to come through. We'll be guided to show up, because the visions that I have for myself, I now know that even the vision to become a millionaire is only the beginning of what is possible, because for some reason, I know and trust now that if the ancestors had shown me when I first set out to become a world champion that I would one day be 3-time world champion, compete for the spot on the Olympics, compete for a spot on the Commonwealth Games team, have these platforms to show, I probably would have shit myself and gone back to bed. I would have been like, hell no, this little country mixed race girl with a big mouth and quick fists from a country town with this dysfunctional background, no way could she take up that space. Hell no. So what they showed me instead was the first step. It was like, hey, what if you could be a world champion? Let's go find out. We'll support you. And now look at what I've done. And the other point I want to get to is my daughter's 15. It's just turned 16. I joined a community board back home when I was pregnant. I just moved home. And mind you, when I wasn't ready to move home, I wasn't ready to leave Melbourne. Pre-COVID, my career was just taking off. I was ready to get my black belt. I was on track to become black belt world champion. My business was taking off. I was starting to get these platforms. And then COVID happened. Sport got taken off the table. Business got taken off the table. And my family were ready to move back home. So I took my kids home even though I wasn't ready to go, because that's where they needed to be. And it's actually where I needed to be, even though I didn't recognise it at the time. And I got invited to join this Aboriginal organisation and take up a leadership position that I wasn't qualified for and didn't feel ready to. But I was like, you know what, I can learn, because we need younger voices there. Because I feel like the work that I do with young people affords me different perspectives, different conversations, and I can carry their voices into spaces they can't access yet. I came home crying multiple times because people who were supposed to be my community leaders were doing harmful things to me. We're not creating the space, and I actually wasn't prepared for those spaces. I wasn't resilient enough. I didn't have the capacity or the skills to be there yet. And my daughter turns around, she goes, why are you crying again? She goes, either stop crying or stop caring about people who don't care about you. At 15.
Wow, powerful.
My daughter, when I look at what it is to be powerful, to be unapologetic, now not does she have it all down pat, but she knows herself, she knows her voice, and I can still see moments where she's uncertain or whatever, but certain things, she does what she wants to do on her time and she's following her path. And I'm like, this is what I've created space for by who I've been, is this is what it looks like to be. Not that they're not without trauma. Their dad and I have had to heal our own dysfunction and figure out our stuff because we're undoing our own conditioning and things like that. Now, I'm not saying our children haven't been harmed or traumatized by us, but we've done the best we could with what we've had to be our best selves in those moments. And anything I've done, even what I've done, a lot of it has been a trauma response to go, fuck you to the world, to go, I'm going to prove you wrong. In this season, I'm coming home to myself. I want to know who Shantelle is. I want to make sense of the past and how I got here. And my word for 2023, or this year into my becoming 40, my final year in my 30s, is awaken to self and purpose, is to give myself permission to say yes to myself, to go, what is the most powerful version of Shantelle? Who is Shantelle being? And let that be of service to the world. Because as I become, I get to, and I'm calling it actualize, alchemize, and amplify. Because I'm not sure, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've seen that?
Yes.
So Maslow actually stole some of his IP from the First Nations people in America. So when he was actually struggling with the development of his concepts, and he went and spent time in a Native American community. And in there, so you know how at the bottom it's your base needs, and then self-actualization is actually at the top of the pyramid. The pyramid is actually an upside down TP. And what in I think it's the Blackfoot community, First Nations community, I'll go back, and I actually saw this as on a LinkedIn article, and what it was is that self-actualization is actually at the base of the journey. So when I become self-actualized as a person in my gifts, then my community becomes actualized, and then our culture and everything else becomes possible. Because as an individual, when I am my most powerful self and I'm blooming and flourishing, that allows me to be of service to the collective. And this is kind of where I'm at with this in this season, is that, one, I'm going to be smart. I'm going to come to women like you and go, Sandy, what were you doing when you were 39? What were your biggest struggles and what was your greatest success? And I started doing this about 5 years ago. And some of the most common themes is that, particularly women from my community or women of colour, is that they abandoned themselves to be of service to everyone else. And it wasn't until they're in their 40s or 50s that they stopped and said, hold on, who am I and what do I want to do in the world? Or they were being of service to the world, but then it was their children who missed out, or they missed out because they were so busy trying to solve the problems of the world, but that they miss the point that by building themselves up, they are solving the problems of the world by being who they need to be, not doing. And it's the being, not the doing, that is the most powerful. And that's something I'm learning from Nina Christian, who is a powerful woman, single mum of 5, children of Māori background, who is a marketing and leadership expert. I'm following her journey over the last few years, and her showing up and speaking her truth more and more and going, this is my experience. This is who I am in the world. And I've realized that it's who I'm being that is the most powerful impact. And for me, it's this concept of who's in the arena with me, who is in the arena taking the same risks that I am. So I don't care if you're a world leader, if you're the queen, if you're an elder or whatever. If you're not in the arena doing the same level of work I am and doing the same level of risk, and when you come to me to give me feedback or to have a comment on my life and what I'm doing, if it's not there to help me become better, if it's only there to harm me or hold me down, respectfully, not so respectfully, you're not my people. I'm not here to listen. And I think that's what my girls have given me permission to do, is looking at who they are and who they're becoming and what the world is telling them to do, even their culture and stuff, is for me to go, actually, I don't need to do so much anymore. I've got 11 years till I turn 50, which is the age of becoming an elder in our community. If you go on age, I want the next 11 years to raise my children, to raise myself, and to explore who I've been, who I am, and who is it that I'm being called to become in this next chapter. And for whatever Kamamoki crazy ass reason, I'm being called to go back to being an elite athlete after having my youngest son. So I've got 6 kids. My oldest is 16, 13-year-old twins, a 13-year-old foster daughter, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old niece who's my kinship daughter, and a crazy ass COVID baby who is the most epitome of self-determination, sass, and fierce character that I could ever have imagined in a 20-month-old. He's a 15-year-old girl, like hormones and everything in a 20-month-old body, but he broke my tailbone.
Oh,
I had to have a cesarean. I'm based in regional Victoria. The thought of going back to elite competitive sport internationally when I have to fund it myself. My daughter now has an international competition career, so she won 3rd at the Worlds last year, and I've got to fund that.
wow.
On paper, it looks freaking stupid. Logistically and logically, it does not make sense for Shantelle Thompson turning 40 to go and focus on being an elite athlete again when I've still got to figure out business. We don't have any financial assets for our family. Like, there's so many things that go against that even being a good choice or a smart choice. But it's something inside of me that is calling me strongly, and it's telling me that this is a foundation for what I'm meant to be doing. This is a pathway that is a vehicle that is going to bring all those other things together and allow it to be woven together. I've just got to trust, and how I'm meant to do it will show up. Where it's meant to guide me will only happen if I have the courage to show up and just take one step at a time. And that's kind of where I'm at, is going into 40. I've been of service. I haven't had the chance to be myself. I've always been raising other people. I've always been responding to this very reactive energy to the world to go, I need to protect my children. And that part of myself, she served me to get here. But now I want to understand, what's the heart of Shantelle? What's the unapologetic version of Shantelle? What does it mean to be the warrior heart? And how does that serve my children? How am I meant to serve the world from my overflow or my gifts rather than my self-abandonment or my self-harm, but also give myself the permission? My baby turns 18 in 2 years. She'll always have mum, but I won't always have my baby. And one of the greatest gifts I can do and service that I can do to the world is to be present to my children and be the mum they need so they can go off into the world and not have to undo anything or feel like there's any parts of themselves missing, as best as I can to set them up to succeed and to fly off into the world. But also, the more resources and experience and wisdom I have, the greater service I can be to the world as I grow. So as I grow and develop and give myself permission to take these risks, to do things differently in this chapter, to go, actually, this next decade is about me in service of others by becoming my most powerful self through my culture and through my vehicle, which is sport and self-development and my storytelling. And then those that are meant to benefit or heal from what I have to say or my energy, they will find me because I will be of service to them. That's kind of where I'm sitting at with all of this.
Wow, God, you're quite extraordinary, Shantelle. I am in awe of you, and I think for me, what I see in you, and I think at 39, honestly, in your 40s, I already see you as an extraordinary thought leader, and I see that, and I know, I see you on much larger platforms, on bigger stages, sharing your incredible wisdom, because I feel like it will touch so many people of color, but also women in general, because I think that you have a fierceness and a courage to look within, which is a fucking scary thing to do, to figure out who you
Oh,
are
yeah.
authentically, and then to take it out in the world, to be a role model, not just for your beautiful daughters, but a role model for your community and a role model for other women. And I think that's an extraordinary thing. I had, in terms of aging, and you touched on this before, of this very patriarchal white Western kind of point of view that women are done by the time they're this magical line in the sand at 40, which is such bullshit. And why I bang on about changing that narrative every day of my life. I had a beautiful woman on and right before Christmas, Faith Igugu, she's just brilliant. And she was saying, and I love this so much, she was saying it's so bizarre when she stepped into this kind of white Western culture of finding out that women were, if you had wrinkles and if you're past 50 and if you're all these things, you're done for. And she came from an African culture of saying the oldest woman in the room, or the eldest person in the room, is the most revered, is the most respected, is the most listened to. And that it's with reverence that they embrace those wrinkles, as you say, and they're getting thicker and all the things, but they're the most listened to people, so that they actually, as they get older, actually remain healthier for a lot longer, because in Western and patriarchal societies, we tend to just ignore people as they get older, and worse for women as they get older, because it's like this kind of thing, well, we live in this very youth-obsessed culture. But I feel so buoyed by women like you, and by you, because I feel like, as a thought leader, which you are, that you will be changing that narrative for your daughters and for yourself and for other women in your community. I think it's powerful, really powerful.
I think there's so many other ways of doing things. And like I said, we talk a lot about innovation and fast results and stuff. The greatest strength comes from going slow and understanding. So for me, a lot of this learning and this wisdom and this opportunity is available to me in each moment of my day. Each moment will guide me to where I'm meant to go next. And for me, it's learning how to be responsive to the moment. Looking within is one of the scariest fucking things I've ever done. And I think for me, one of the thoughts or understandings of why people, that Maya Angelou's saying that when you know better, you do better. I'm like, bullshit. There are so many people who know better and choose not to do better, and I'm one of them. So for example, I'm currently preparing for my first competition for the year. And like I said, on paper, it does not make any freaking sense to go back to a competition, particularly when you have children who can beat you.
Wow.
My 13-year-old daughter, when I first she was 12 at the time, when I first came back to one of my first training sessions, she almost tapped me out from her shoulder pressure on my face.
Wow.
The only thing that saved me was that I had skill and ego, because I was like, I'm not tapping to a 12-year-old. Don't care how good she is. And this is the balance between going, my ego likes the idea of being a black belt. There is a hunger and a resentment as well for the fact that COVID took that from me.
Yeah.
Having a baby took that from me. Now, that's a choice that I made, but my husband and my daughter got to grade together. She got her blue belt and he got his black belt. So my oldest daughter got her first adult kind of belt. I was crying, so grateful. And I was resentful as fuck of that moment too, because I was like, I was meant to get my black belt first. Now, most people would run from saying stuff like that, right? But your jealousy is a window into what you want, and it's how you respond to the jealousy that is the dictator of how that plays out, rather than the emotion itself. And I partially funded my daughter's first trip to America last year, and her dad's her coach, so I had to fund both of them, which meant that I had to juggle the 3 younger ones, generating enough business to fund that trip and everything else. And I was sitting there, and we could watch live, and I was sitting there, and I was breastfeeding the baby, and I was about to watch her go on. I was resentful and jealous as hell. And I was like, right, I don't think I'm ready to retire. I have no idea. I have no idea what this means. I don't even know how the hell. And I said to the ancestors, and I literally, I've just started talking to them now. I'm like, you want me to do this, but how am I meant to do this? Because right now, in reality, it doesn't look like it's even possible. And I just keep getting this, here's the balance, have timing, like have cycles and things. Like there's competitions that I'm aiming for this year, and I'm aiming to win, but trusting that if it's not my year this year, that the time will come for me to have that opportunity to execute that. And even if I never achieve that goal, just by having that as a marker on the journey, being called to follow that, it's Moana is a big inspiration for me in terms of her story would never have become possible or have been told if Dwayne Johnson hadn't become the icon that he is. No one, Disney was not interested in sharing or creating a story about a little brown girl who was the hero of her own story and who went against her culture, went against her parents to follow her own knowing, and this knowing that no one else could see but herself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is.
And here's the thing, her story didn't become possible until Dwayne Johnson became who he was and the influencer that he is, that other people went, when Dwayne said, yep, we're going to do this, and people said, okay. But even if no one else had gotten behind him, he had enough wealth to fund the damn thing himself, but he didn't have to because of the platform he'd created. But Moana is barefoot. She's thick. She goes against the grain of everything that she's told her parents, their history, to remember. She had to remember for herself who her people were beyond that traumatic event of the monsters and stuff like her grandmother. But her grandmother guided, when her grandmother's purpose was done, it was her time to pass on. And by Moana navigating that journey herself, returning the heart back to and healing, her people were able to heal and become as well. And they were able to move into the future in a new way. And I think that this becoming older and listening to cultures that have already had these practices creates a new opportunity for sustainability, for collectivism, for mental health issues to go down because we have purpose. Everyone has a role to play. No one is left behind. In Aboriginal culture, no one is left behind. Everyone is taken care of and supported through their collective efforts and their collective capacity and skills. And I think that's the difference of these women showing up. And by you giving a platform and sharing, it's not that there's any less. No one is going to lose out because we rise up. Well, some people might lose out, but that's because they're not good enough to be where they're supposed to be. And some people go, oh, I don't want to be given a seat at the table because someone said that I have to meet a quota number. Hey, if I'm invited to sit at a table and I'm only there because people are wanting to tick a box, I'm okay with that because I know that I'm going to have impact by being there. And if it's a table that is if it's a seat that's in alignment with who I am and where I'm meant to go, and I know I can be of service and make progression in that space, then I will do that. But in order for me to have wisdom to share, I need to have lived a life that is built off of whatever I'm meant to do. And I'm figuring this out. But like I said, this path that I'm on doesn't make sense to even me at times. And I'm like, even business, I don't know anything, almost next to nothing about business finance, business strategy and structures. Where I've gotten to in the last 6 years has been winging it. And where I'm at now is going, right, I need to be more strategic. I need to have a roadmap so I can, what does it take to be a professional keynote speaker, a book deck, learning these systems and learning from women like yourself to go, what do I need to have in place to be a successful business owner? And the reason I talk about the self-actualization, and this is the thing, Indigenous storytelling is very different to Western storytelling. Western storytelling comes in and goes, I'm going to tell you the 3 concepts I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to give you a call to action. I'm almost dictating to you what you need to learn. I'm telling you, which is a very patriarchal, paternalistic approach, right?
Very.
Indigenous storytelling and ways of knowing, being and doing is very intuitive. It's very guided. So when an elder or the teacher tells the story or the lesson, it's actually the listener's job to come with open ears and an open heart to take the lesson that is meant for them. So rather than someone listening to my story and going, and some people will listen to this and go, what the fuck? Like, that didn't go anywhere. That's just rambling. But to someone else, they'll be like, oh my God, I need to listen to everything. And I would say, stop, listen. What you need will resonate with you. And here's the difference. When you hear that story, if something resonates with you, that's the thing you need to work on next. If you come back and you listen to the same podcast, same story, same lesson, whatever it is, and you hear the same thing, you haven't grown. You haven't evolved from the person who heard it the first time. However, if you hear something new, it's because you've evolved and you've grown from that. And that's how we grow, is that even with trauma and healing, for me, what's worked is going, if I sit in a room with a counsellor and they go, right, we're going to bring up your whole history, and they focus on the sexual abuse, I'm like, that's not a problem for me. I healed that a long time ago. That's not a trigger for me. Whereas being a mother to a 16-year-old, that's very much a trigger for me. And so for me, whatever trauma I need to heal will be triggered in the moment. And I'm like, whatever's triggering me is the thing that I need to heal in order to grow to the next stage. And healing comes in growth. And so self-actualization is the first step for me. As I become actualized, so does my capacity to be of service. Alchemize means to bring together all the wisdom and the experiences I've had, and how does that gold or philosophy bring life to the next moment or to the next years or to the legacy. And amplify is for me going, how can I do more with less? That 20-80 rule. What is the 20% that I can do now that's going to yield 80% of the results? For me, being on a podcast means that that's organic stuff that's going to be there. People can find me. I can become magnetic to the people that I'm meant to serve, rather than me trying to force things or go out there. It's like, actually, I'm doing the work I need to do. The things that I need to do, or the people I'm meant to serve, or the things I need to do that work, will find me when I'm in alignment with those things. So when we give ourselves permission to do this, and understand in the context of where you are right now, context and perspective are so important. I'm almost turning 40. I've got 6 kids. I've got bills to pay. Training right now is not. So for me, there was a woman who became a world champion in her 30s, and she only trained twice a week. And what she said was, it wasn't about how much time she had to train. It was how much she loved what she was doing, how much she was willing to I think the concept, some people might eat the shit sandwich. There's always shit things that we have to do in the pursuit of things that we want to do, right? There's things we have to do to lay the foundations to become that person. Right now, I don't know shit about my finances. I'm probably going to get a big ass tax bill because I haven't done the things I'm supposed to do or laid the foundations. Now, I can either run from that with shame, or I can own it and go, in order to become a black belt in business, these are the things you got to do. Don't want to do it. It brings up so much trauma and shame because I've never been taught about finances and money or whatever. But I need to do that to set my family up for success, to be a business that other people can invest in, to make wise decisions. So this is the shit sandwich I've got to eat in this moment in order to become a woman who can manage her finances and attract more opportunities and become an in-demand brand that people either A, want to hear from, or potentially someone might hear this and go, I want to invest in Chantelle's journey. I want to know more about the work she's doing with young women, or I want to support her athletic career, knowing that as she does this or create a documentary, someone might want to invest in that and go, Shantelle, how can we resource you so you can do more of what you need to do to become that person? Or they go, hey, we want to book you for a keynote. And when I say my keynote is $10,000 or $15,000, people aren't going to blink, because I can say, look, that money, that fee, you're actually supporting self-determination. You're supporting a social enterprise model that is funding the work that I'm doing in communities, that is allowing me to fund my daughter's career or these sort of things. But going into my 40s is about me embracing the fact that my mum passed away at 42.
Wow. I'm sorry.
I get to be and do the things my mum couldn't be. And it triggers me, and I've had a lot of anxiety and fear and overwhelm over the last year or so coming into that, knowing. But the more I know about what my mum was dealing with, by the time my mum was 25, she'd already buried 2 children 3 children, sorry, and she'd lost 2 more children to my grandmother taking one, and then my father took us other children because we weren't safe in our mum's care. And yet I know that my mum did the best she could with what she had. So if this is me doing the best I can and healing her by being what I need to be, but also I want my children. And the reason I talk more about my girls than my son is because that's the focus right now. My sons are going to be good. Like, they've got amazing role models. They're being nurtured. The girls have their own challenges. And the thing is, even with the levels of violence against women and girls that we're facing in Australia, I'll only talk about Australia, is horrible. We shouldn't have this. But the reality is that I said to my son, I said, how do you feel when you hear all this? And he goes, I feel guilty and I feel ashamed and I feel pressure. How is my son supposed to learn how to be a man in a 21st century when there's no space for him to learn how to become that, how to feel emotions, when he's still told, oh, don't cry like a girl? He had 2 female teachers at his school. My son gets really frustrated and he's a big boy. He's black. I've had to tell him, you need to control yourself because you're already at risk just because of your color and your size. Now, that's shit, but that's our reality. And then he had 2 female positions of power who powered over him in a situation. So he was late to class and the teacher was like having a go at him in front of everyone and didn't even ask him why he was late. And she turned around and she said something and he tried to explain himself. She goes, it's not my problem. And I've always taught my kids to talk back, speak up for yourself and let me deal with the consequences. No one is allowed to power over you or put you in an unsafe situation. And he turned around and he said, goes, well, it's about to become your problem with my mum. And he got detention for being disrespectful. Anyway, the head teacher calls me and I listened and I let her have a say. And I said, now, did you go and ask the teacher what she said to my son to in that situation? What was her part in that situation? She goes, oh, well, no. I said, you've known my son for a year. Have you ever known him to be disrespectful? And she goes, well, no. I said, so why didn't you go and ask her what she did to cause his reaction rather than automatically blaming him? So anyway, he did his detention and then he came in and he was picking up rubbish and one of the teachers turned around and she had he's very reactive and he's very much victim mentality and all this sort of stuff. So I take it with a grain of salt when he comes and tells me things because he likes drama. And he said that the teacher was smirking at him and was like, oh, did you enjoy picking up your rubbish and have you learnt from it? But then another female teacher came over and Swane by this point was looking down. He was frustrated and he gets tears and he tends to go like, and it looks like he's being disrespectful, but he's trying to control himself. And the teacher goes, see, that's your problem right there. When he came home and he was almost in tears because he felt so embarrassed. And I went to those teachers and I said, do you realise what you've done? I said, now, if my son had have reacted out of emotion and hit one of you or lost his shit, he would be the one who would be labelled and targeted and everything. And I said, what role did you play in instigating that situation? But because you're women and he's a boy and a man of colour and his size, he would have been blamed for his reactions, but no one else would have had to take responsibility for what escalated. So it's so many different nuances that need to happen in order for us to start to address and create change in these spaces. But I want to be very deliberate and intentional with the woman I'm being, because who I'm being will be the role model for so many others. And that's a responsibility for me to go, yeah, I could be on this board. I could be speaking on these issues. I could be doing a lot because I have the capacity to do a lot. But then I'm setting my children and the girls that I lead and role model for and other women up to fail because I'm not doing things that are in alignment with my values. I'm not prioritizing rest and my own self-development and going, but also I have I'm a part of a business collective called the Becoming Better Together Collective with Lillian Gikuvi and Gemma Saunders. And we come together and we help organisations become better together through creating cultures of conversation.
I love that.
And we found that in the D&I space, a big missing piece was people don't know how to have conversations. And that in order to create DE&I and diversity, equity and inclusion, you need to first feel like you can belong. And that starts with being able to know yourself and own your own stories, but people being able to sit with other people's stories and seek to understand rather than judge or react. And so I bring in yarning and storytelling and the Indigenous perspective. Gemma is a white queer woman and she brings in Kiki, which is drag queens would get together after a show and they'd kick off their shoes and heels and sit around and go, okay, what worked, what didn't, and really debrief the situation. And then Lillian brings in her Kenyan culture, and Harambe is about the collective good or the collective purpose. And it was in sitting with Lillian and having these deeper yarns and learning. And she said to me, and I was really angry and frustrated about a situation that was happening at home in our community. And she said, but Shantelle, how does the collective feel about it? Are you the only person who feels like that? I said, but what do you mean? And she goes, well, if the collective is in tune with this, is in an alignment with this, and you're the only one who has a problem, then you need to look, is it ego? Is it your own stuff? Because if the collective is on board, she goes, if you're going to bring up a problem to the collective, you need to be willing to be a part of the solution. You can't just bring up a problem and then walk away. So for me, this is about sustainability and self-care. And it's like, what problems or what opportunities or solutions am I bringing to the world that I'm willing to be a part of? And the balance between what solutions am I doing and what solutions am I adding value to? So for me, women's empowerment, supporting the next generation of the girls, even with Kiilalaana, I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't even want to be a fucking CEO of this. I'm now running an organization that I'm like, shit, I'm the leader. What I've realized though is that I was meant to start it. I was meant to give birth to this thing, and now it's my job to find other people who are ready to lead it. I'm just meant to be Aunty Shan. I'm meant to come in, tell my story, give a piece of wisdom, give this kid a kick up the ass and go, oi, come here, you're not doing the right thing. Let's have a yarn about it and let's make a plan to change. That's what I'm meant to do. They're meant to be going, where's Aunty Shan in the world now? Like my family literally calls me, where's Wally? They're like, we never know where you are or what you're doing. So this all weaves together in going, the more permission I give myself to become, the more I can understand where I'm called to be of service and where I'm not. Like, where is it I'm not meant to be playing? Because if I'm doing things that I'm not meant to be doing, or that I don't want to be doing, or that I'm doing out of toxic obligation, I'm actually going to do more harm than good in those spaces, because I'm there out of resentment or obligation, and it's outside my scope, it's outside my capacity or my skill set, and I'm going to end up doing more harm than good. And that's sitting and looking at myself going, I'm the cause of my own problems. And I got face planted on the mat because I didn't do the training I was meant to be doing, or I got this big tax bill because I knew 2 years ago I was meant to get my shit together and learn this stuff. That's about taking responsibility, but not from a place of shame, but from a place of going, this is the shit I need to sit in, because shit is really good fertilizer. You can plant a lot of stuff in shit and it can grow. But how I'm doing that is by meeting each moment for what it is and going, what's within my capacity? What is the next best step? And figuring it out one step at a time. I don't have a roadmap for how to be a black belt world champion and an elite athlete and raise 6 kids and be financially stable. I don't know how to do that yet, but I know that this is the path that I'm on. I don't know how to speak my culture or how to more about Indigenous storytelling. That's the path I'm on. Reconciliation is a big movement in Australia right now. What role do I have to play to add value to progressing reconciliation as a vehicle to bring healing and change to this country, so that I can be proud and have my identity embraced and celebrated in my lifetime, so that my daughter who's fair skinned doesn't get a white privileged person or even a person of colour who goes, hold on, how can you be a black person with white skin? Or have my grandchild walk to school and not be afraid that they're going to lose their life because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, as what happened to Cassius Turvey. Like, this is our reality and this is our challenge. But in order to be of service to the challenges of and the reality is, I have privilege right now. I live in Australia. My children are relatively safe. I'm not in Syria. I'm not in Iran right now fighting for my daughter to be beaten just because she opened her mouth or showed her hair. I have certain resources and privileges that are going to allow me to, when people say, oh, I'm afraid to, I don't want to start a podcast because people might laugh at me or it scares me. When that thought thinking was in my own head, I was like, are you fucking serious, Shan? Like, my higher self, it was like that warrior heart yarn. Are you fucking serious? Like, you don't want to start a podcast to share your thoughts because you're worried you might piss someone off. And the thing is, that person not going to, like, in context and perspective to myself, my yarn to myself was, your life isn't in danger right now. You have resources, you have strength, you have capacity. This is not a life-threatening situation. Who could you help and be of service to by raising your voice or starting that podcast? Even if no one listens and you're just getting your own thought process good, even if you're just getting better at sharing your voice and sharing a message and having a yarn, who else is that going to benefit? How's that going to build your skill sets to be of a greater service down the track? And when I share my story or I do my work, I don't change lives. I do not change anyone's life. It is up to you to change your own life. But what I can do is either give you permission by being visible and showing you what is possible through my own story, or I can create brave spaces, because even safe spaces, I can't create safe space. I don't know what safety means to you. I can create a brave space by showing up and going, hey, let's have brave conversations and be courageous and do things differently by being willing to sit in all of our shit and all of our parts and see where the opportunities are in that. So anyone that looks at me and goes, I can never do what Shantelle does, or Chantelle's amazing and does a lot of these things I've done because when I've been faced in a situation and said, if I don't do something to create change, it's my children who are going to be at the consequence of this. And it's a privilege for me to be alive at this time and in this space because my ancestors fought and sacrificed for me to even exist as an Aboriginal woman, to be proud and to have a platform, to have a voice. That's a responsibility I want to honour. It's not, it can be scary and it can be heavy, but when I look at my fears and create perspective and context around them, I'm not fighting for my life right now. There are women across the world who are literally, there are 13-year-old girls the same age as my daughters who are already married, have already gone through genital mutilation or whatever it's called. So when my daughter came home and said, Mum, I got in trouble today because I didn't go to math, and I said, I breathed very hard. I breathed and I said, why didn't you want to go to math? Hoping she would come up with some genuine reason. I didn't feel like it. Well, I lost my shit. And I gave her some of the biggest, tough, unapologetic love she could have gotten. She got a verbal hiding. And anyone that's got a problem with that, that's yours. To not want to go to math because you didn't feel like it, because you don't like your teacher, is a first world problem, and you need to check your attitude and your privilege, because right now there are girls literally dying and being tortured to death because they want the right to wear their hair the way they want to wear it and to get an education.
Exactly right.
So you need to check your attitude, pull your head out of your own ass and show up. Now, if it had been something about her mental health or the teacher was bullying her or something, I would have addressed that at the time. But it's about that, and that's why I said it's being present at each moment that allows me to have context and respond rather than react. And by giving myself permission to awaken and be my own purpose in laying the foundations for who I want to be and being ready for who I'm being asked to become by my ancestors and the world around me and what role I'm meant to play, I'm going to give permission to others to do the same thing. And it's not about doing more. It's about doing more with less and amplifying that. But I need to self-actualize first. I need to alchemize my own wisdom in order to become the warrior heart and become the woman who is the dream walker and the life weaver, who's strong in culture and strong in self, and can trust that when I do share my story or my voice or have a yarn, I never know how far those ripples are going to go. I never know what seeds it's going to plant for someone else to go. I can become whoever I want to become because someone else is doing it too.
Look, I just had shivers down my spine. You are an extraordinary human being, an incredibly powerful woman. I love that you call yourself a warrior, because you are. I am so grateful and so honored that you would come and share the confessional with me today and share this space and share so much wisdom, because you have so much wisdom to give. And as I said, I see you on much bigger platforms, on much bigger stages, sharing that wisdom and getting that message out to so many people. You're extraordinary. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. No, thank you for creating a brave space where I could show up and be myself. And even my own voice inside my head was like, shut up, Shantelle, you're going off on tangents. How is this even making sense? But then it's that vulnerable part of myself and trusting and going, this is your process. This is who you are right now. This is your storytelling. This is your truth. And Sandy invited you here for a reason. And if someone looks at it and goes, I'm not sitting there listening to this one person for an hour and 20 minutes or however long the time is that we've recorded. It's trusting that whoever's meant to find this will find it, and it will be a benefit to those who need it. So thank you for trusting your gut and following your intuition and being someone who is using their light and their space to allow others to come in, because the more we do that, the more we become a collective of people, of brave women and women identifying people and people who are wanting to do change in the world. By being that first, be the change for yourself first, and then allow that to lead the change you want to do in the world, because that's where the sustainability will happen. That's where the collective power will happen, and we will continue to create this momentum that has been created for those behind us to set the generations after us free, and to hopefully give them a world that they'll be proud to inherit rather than the world we're being told they'll inherit.
Absolutely. And, you know, a world where women will be at the forefront of trying to heal, you know, the land and the earth, and, you know, hopefully a world where our daughters don't have to fight so hard to have space just because they're women.
Well, I'm not sure if you've heard of Tidda Trent, and this will be the last thing I kind of say because I think it really weaves everything together beautifully. Tidda Trent is known as the woman who buried her dreams in a tin can, for those that aren't familiar with her work. And she, at 14, was married off. By the time she was 18, had 4 children, lost 1 child to malnutrition, is from one of the countries in Africa. And she wrote a book called Awakened Woman. And in that, she says that women's becoming awakened to their own sacred purpose and their sacred selves is the healing and the medicine that the world needs. So we as women think that we need to go out and solve this problem or solve that problem. As we heal ourselves and we lead from that calling, that inner voice, that is the medicine, that is the healing that the world needs. And Tidda being the example. So her dream was to go to America to get an undergraduate degree, a master's and a doctorate. And coming from Africa, in her mind, and it was true, it would be easier to go to America to get an education than it would be to be in her own country, because spaces were so limited and they were reserved for the males or the really, really elite of their fields. For her at 18, to even have a dream of that as a mum of 4 from a poor regional Indigenous community in her, and her mum turned around and said to her, what is your sacred dream for your community? When your personal dreams are tied to the betterment of your community, they become more powerful. And her community dream was to open up a school, was to go away and build herself first, to get her education, to do all of those things. Once she had that, she then had the foundations to open up a school. Oprah Winfrey heard about her story, and she became Oprah Winfrey's favorite guest of all time. And Oprah Winfrey gave her, I think it was $2 million to open up her first school. Now, if Tidda had been told at 18 when she first shared that dream out loud, she'd had that dream inside her for a long time, out loud with people, she wouldn't have believed them. But because she had the courage to go, that is my dream, and the journey that she had to go on to even get to America, let alone with an abusive husband, to graduate, she just showed up in order to become Tidda Trent, the woman who is Oprah Winfrey's favorite guest of all time. In order for Nelson Mandela to become Nelson Mandela, they first had to be Nelson Mandela. They first had to be Tidda and meet life for what it was in order to become that. If any of you are listening to this, give yourself permission to sit with yourself, because you never know, by giving yourself permission to be you, what that is going to roll out into the world, and the ripple effects that will have, the seeds that it will plant for other people. And also, I encourage you to get curious and get invested in Indigenous storytelling, because you never know where that could lead or what that could open for you.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's really important. I'm so I always feel like everything happens for a reason, and I'm always like, when people's like alignment. When you talked about Dr. Tidda Trent, I, through this podcast and through meeting so many beautiful women, was invited to be part of an extraordinary anthology, which is called The Power to Rise Above. And it is 30 women sharing our stories of trauma, abuse or bullying, but how we have risen and the steps we took to rise through that and work through it. And this book really is a love song to every young woman or every woman out there who is going through trauma or pain, who thinks, oh, I'm alone and that I'm never going to get beyond this. That's what this story was. But the reason I raised this book was not to tell you that I'm in this book. It was because the foreword, can you believe it, is beautifully written by Tara Trent. And so she has written the foreword of the book. I'm so proud of that. And
the power to weave together.
To just know that she was willing to step in and write such a beautiful foreword, and for me to be so honoured to be a part of that. And these women, by the way, the 30 stories are women from all over the world, which is so beautiful. So different cultures and different experiences. And for her, it's just a beautiful way, as you said, everything she stands for is extraordinary, and that she's still willing to step into spaces, because she could be doing anything she wants, and she's still stepping into these very human, very, female-centric spaces to say, I'm going to give up my time. I'm going to read these stories and I'm going to write the foreword for this book was just such an extraordinary honour for me and for every other woman in this book. And I love that you raised her and talked about her. And I did hear you talk about her on your podcast as well, which is amazing. I will put up every link to all of the incredible things that you do, because I want people to be able to follow your journey and see you. And you're right. You don't know how this podcast may have a ripple effect out there for other women, and also for yourself in your journey. And that's what this is all about. And that's why I love it. I don't think, interestingly, when you said, people will be listening and think, you just went off in all these different directions. This is very consciously a conversational podcast. And I wanted to start it that way, and it has continued that way, because I think that's where the magic comes from, and those are the moments, the jewels, if you like, to allow women space. And once women are able to be comfortable in that space and just have a conversation, that's where the magic comes from. So I'm so honoured that you shared your beautiful storytelling with me and with our listeners. And I'm just going to make sure that everybody knows who you are. And I'm going to put all the links up. If you're not already following Shantelle Thompson, you should be. I don't know why you're not. Your journey is incredible. I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you for sharing your platform. And if anyone is interested, please follow, reach out. I'd love more opportunities to share my story, or for more opportunities to reach more people. I am writing a book this year, and it's called Suicide to World Champion, The Life Lessons of the Barkindji Warrior. And look, if you're interested in supporting any of the work that I do, please get involved. And thank you, Sandy, for this opportunity.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom. I think you're incredible, and I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more from now on. I think you're great. As I said, everyone, I will put all of the notes will be in our show notes and across our socials when this is published. Thank you again so much.
Thanks, everyone. Big love.
Big love. Thanks for listening to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is brought to you by WB40, Women Beyond 40 magazine, available now at WB40.com. The Good Girl Confessional podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you listen to quality podcasts. We're also now available on YouTube. We chat with really interesting women about their hard-won wisdom, but it really helps us if you can subscribe, like, and share the podcast. Thanks so much for your support. Bye for now.